welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. If you're new to the channel, please be sure to subscribe now for quality horror narrations on YouTube. Please hit the thumbs up button and make sure to hit the bell so that you're notified of my new weekly uploads. Comment below and introduce yourself, and I will be sure to respond. If you want to be featured on an upcoming video, email me. My email will be in the description box below as well. Sit back, relax, stay sinful. I shared an apartment with my best friend Claire when I attended college. She also went to the same school but dropped out to become a poker dealer across state lines. She made a lot of money at the casino, so she rented a second apartment near her work. She decided to live with me 3 days a week, spend the next 4 at the casino. One Thursday afternoon, I came home utterly spent from working non-stop on school projects that required hours of intense focus and demanding physical labor. At only 4:00 p.m., I put on my PJs, a tank top and boxer shorts. I grabbed a blanket and a pillow and then headed to collapse on the couch. Ready to do nothing, I turned on the TV and then settled down for the early weekend. While I embraced doing nothing for the night, Claire collected her overnight bag, put her uniform on, and waved a brief goodbye before heading out the front door. I thought I'd better check to see if the locks were engaged, but my eyelids were so heavy. I was already half asleep. We had a large picture window facing west with steady foot traffic passing by. When the sun shined low in the late afternoon and into evening, it put a reflective glare on the glass. This prevented anyone from looking inside the apartment. I love incandescent light, so I turned on a dim lamp next to me. I remember how dreamy and mesmerized I felt. The TV was playing in the background while I laid back and stared out the window. I half-consciously watched people drift back and forth on the sidewalk. I remember wanting this lazy moment of bliss to go on, but I could see and feel the sun beginning to dip behind the western mountain range. I needed to get up and draw the curtains. I was still too tranquil and dreamy to get up. I was still too physically spent to check the front door as well. As the day slipped into evening, fewer and fewer people passed by. When I was almost asleep, I suddenly felt myself jolt awake. I was pulled out of that beautiful in-between place of dream and consciousness. Something felt dangerous. I quickly took inventory of what might have aroused me to such a state of alarm. I vaguely remembered seeing a shifty and somewhat medium to large-sized man slowly pass by the window. The sidewalk was free of people now, but I was overcome by a foreboding feeling. I was acutely aware that people could see into the apartment because I waited too long to close the curtains. The light was quickly disappearing behind the mountains, so I stood up to untie and close the drapery. At the window, I could see the man who made me suspicious had actually not passed by. He stood still just beyond the scope of the window, from the point of view of the couch. Now that I could see him at the window, we immediately made eye contact. He seemed derelict and full of malice. Maybe he was in his 40s, medium build with a Carhartt jacket on. The vibe felt profoundly nefarious. My mouth went dry. I paused for a second and then watched him make a slight turn of his torso towards the door. At that instant, I dropped everything, grabbed my phone, and ran to the door the same time he dashed towards it. I was terrified Claire had forgotten to lock the door and kicked myself for not checking. We could see each other through the large window as we both made an instant dash to the door. I just kept thinking, this is like the movies. This isn't real. To my horror, I found the door was unlocked, and we reached the door at the exact same time. My body surged with adrenaline. Colors were made more vivid, my vision was sharper, and I was stronger than I ever thought I could be. At a little over 5 feet and 100 pounds, I was no match for this man that was average to lean build and in his 30s or 40s, but my adrenaline was pumping and I was stronger and had more control than I expected. Although I don't remember dialing 911, I must have. The phone was on the ground and the operator was demanding to know what was going on. I could hear her voice from the phone that was several feet away from me, but I couldn't articulate to her the help I needed because I was all encompassed in grappling with a man trying to force entry into my apartment. I couldn't tell you how long the incident took place, but it was violent, and I started to fatigue as the struggle went back and forth, requiring all of my attention and strength. My attempt to talk to the operator just came out in incoherent bursts. After screaming, kicking, and slamming his hand in the door, I finally was able to close it long enough to engage the deadbolt. Exhausted, shaking, and terrified, I slid to the floor and picked up my phone. I was covered in sweat. I was still in a state of disbelief and utter shock. The man was jiggling the doorknob and gruffly demanding I let him in. I backed away from the door and picked up the phone, saying I got the door locked, but a man tried to get inside that I didn't know, and he was still outside demanding to be let in. The dispatcher said there were officers on the way. When they finally arrived 20 minutes later, the man was gone, or so the police said. However, it did not appear to me that the police even checked the area. The police came into my foyer, and they absolutely towered over me, started telling me that it was nothing. I know what I went through and it wasn't nothing. They didn't even take notes. They were huge and intimidating. Suddenly I felt foolish for calling, even though my life, or at least my well-being, was very much threatened. I felt I only narrowly escaped some terrible fate. There was a dangerous man out there, and if not for me, then check for the neighborhood. I felt so unbelievably dismissed. The police can be great, and they can also be assholes. No telling who you'll get when you call. Always double check to make sure you've locked your door. I was married for a brief spell in my early 20s in Salt Lake City to a tobacconist named David. The tobacco companies would wine and dine him, and I got to tag along. I grew up middle class, so it was these diners that introduced me to food that I had no idea could taste so divine. This is all to say life was good. There wasn't strife or any real negativity. We lived in a place downtown called the Avenues. The enormous neighborhood in Salt Lake City called the Avenues is truly a mix of old and new, stately and humble. Arts and crafts and poorly constructed 1970s apartment terraces called things like Friendship Manor. We lived on E Street in what was a mansion in 1910. It was literally called Spalding Manor, as the words were carved in the stepping stones before the stairs. In the back we had a greenhouse full of bonsai trees that his brother tended to, and a dreamy little patio for coffee that was set tightly in a winsome and well-manicured full garden. It was truly a charming and enchanted place. I loved every inch of it except the basement. The house had a wonderful, light-filled spirit until you walked down the winding stairs into the dark labyrinth downstairs. I've heard people say they could feel something staring at them, and I would try to recall from personal experience what they meant, and I couldn't until one day I swept away the cobwebs and uncovered the suppressed memories of Spalding Manor, and it was truly a horrific basement, and I was finally able to emphatically relate to how they felt. All those years back when we rented Spalding Manor, I worked in a high-end furniture shop refinishing and distressing contemporary and vintage furniture. We never restored it to its original state, unless it was Danish minimalism made of maple or oak, or something like that, but otherwise we'd get creative and bring new life into boring or forgotten pieces. I bring this previous job up because in the basement of Spalding Manor, there was 100 years of abandoned furniture stacked to the ceiling and packed to the gills with untold spoils, but even with all my exuberance and uncontrollable prickles of fear. The owner said we could take any of it, yet all the dollar signs and promised adventure of finding treasure couldn't cut through the desperate feeling of extreme danger of going there, let alone taking any one of the antiques. There was one room in the basement that felt a little lighter, and that's where Dave put his piano. I play the upright bass, so I would take it down to the basement where the piano was, and Dave and I would play together. He had nice recording mics set up so we could record our music together. I still don't like the basement, but despite feeling like there were eyes on me, I felt pretty safe in the piano room where there was a window and light streaming in from the outside. It must have been October because the light was fading fast and the basement was getting colder. I usually kept my bass upstairs in the winter and by the piano in the basement in the summer. I would sometimes go alone into the basement to record my playing. This would help with practice and help improve my playing by listening to my recordings. Now, I know how crazy what I'm going to tell you will sound, but it did happen, and later Dave would bear witness to my experience. One evening in October, I went downstairs to play my bass and record it. I had 2 mics set up and played for a straight 20 or 30 minutes. When I played back my recording, I heard my bass play for a few minutes. Then it cut out and there was silence. Then there was a voice. There was no one else in the house except Dave and I played continuously so there would be no breaks in the recording. Shortly after the silent pause in the recording, I could hear the voice of an old woman that was severely annoyed. Now the tone of her voice was downright terrifying. It was pinched with a rage and hate, even though it tried to sound contained. The timbre of her voice was level as well, as even in the tone and expression, yet she failed to hide her seething disgust as she admonishing me harshly. You need to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. Each of her words were vexed with contempt, betraying any helpful instruction, as every word was meted out with revulsion and odium. I dropped everything, yelling back at her, "Lady, you need to find Jesus." Wasting no time, I spoke as I skipped stairs, running as fast as I could back towards Dave. Dave was not rattled, and barely interested in my feverish attempts to explain what happened. He eventually went down in the basement with me to investigate, at my incessant begging. In the basement, the recording kept going, was now playing the music I had originally expected to hear, that I previously recorded without any foreign voice interrupting. He stopped the music and went back to the beginning. To my continued amazement and shock, he too heard what I originally heard, the same nasty voice pedantically preaching to me about Jesus. However, amazing this was to me, Dave was not mystified, nor was his interest aroused. To the contrary, as he was inclined to believe I picked up a rogue television or radio wave. That doesn't explain why the recording of my bass stopped, however. Regardless of what he tried to explain away, I knew it was not of this world. I have no idea why I was spiritually reached out to and admonished so sternly with what should have been a peaceful message. If anyone is inclined to think that way, but I was reached out to and I felt like it was more malicious than anything. I am fond of many religions, and I personally have a strong moral compass that despite not believing in a punitive universe, I still abide by it. This entity felt dark, and I do not find Christianity inherently dark. I believe many of its tenets to be worthy of merit. I do not believe Christ in his name would send vitrolic spirits to punitively share his gospel. I think this spirit was lost and bitter. I think they refused to relinquish life and were envious of life. I did not feel this spirit anywhere else in the house. The house felt so light and full of spirit light too. The garden felt healthy and there was a greater sense of joy there than any other place I've ever lived. It was just the basement, and particularly the area where all the antiques and antique furniture was, that felt cold and hostile. I'm just so glad I listened to my instincts and never set foot in that quadrant, despite the call of many spoils and the adventure of lost antique discoveries. After hearing my recording interrupted by a malicious spirit, I just kept away from the basement from that point on. I was happy I listened to my gut, lest I had invited it into other areas of the home by exploring and plundering the antiques she seemed to lord over. The basement holds some kind of strong darkness I never want to encounter again. It's been years since I've lived there or even talked to Dave. I still drive by Spaulding Manor once or twice a month. I wonder if it is still enchanted with the good, as well as hiding a dark secret in the basement. To this day, I wonder about the abandoned treasures hiding in Spaulding's dark labyrinth of a basement. It's not a dragon guarding its spoils from being pillaged, rather it is a severe old Christian woman. The kind of religious person who abuses doctrines by hiding behind the letter of the law, completely missing the spirit of the law. This allows a monster to grow in the dissonance between the letter of the law and the merit or intention of gospel. All of this gives way to a twisted interpretation of doctrine that is then fueled by fiery entitlement and indignation. To me, that's a lot scarier than a dragon any day. I apologize for the length of this story. It's the most terrifying thing that I've ever experienced. This happened 4 years ago when my boyfriend and I were still sort of fresh into the relationship. My sister had recommended me a snorkeling trip for a fun thing to do with my boyfriend. It was this rock quarry surrounded by a campground that is filled with water, and it's known for its crystal clear water and its diving. There's apparently a helicopter and a school bus that people dive down to see. My boyfriend and I decided to go camping there for the night. While we were checking in, we separately both got a bad feeling about the place, but had kept it to ourselves until after we left. So, at first it was a really good time. We snorkeled in this shallowish area of the quarry, and although the depth of the water was a bit uncanny, I still was enjoying myself. The water is 65 feet deep, so once you swam out of the shallow area, it definitely dropped off and it was pitch black. This is actually when I realized I'm terrified of water. Besides the dark, deep water while you're swimming, there is something very scary about a lake that is perfectly still. I assume because it is a quarry, the water doesn't have a current. My boyfriend and I are winding down our night, and we're back at our campsite. We are camping in a grassy patch down a hill from the road. Our tent is pitched in a wooded area that our campsite is extended to, and just across the green is a campsite that looks well lived in, but our neighbors were out. We were making hot dogs over the fire when our neighbors returned. It's nighttime now and they immediately go to sleep. I'd say 20 to 30 minutes after they get back in is when things started to become spooky. My boyfriend and I were chatting when we noticed a dark figure watching us from the hill. Because of the shadow of the fire, we could not actually make out the characteristics of the figure, but we knew he was staring directly at us, almost hiding behind our neighbor's truck. He had watched us for what felt like forever, until he started walking down the road again. We both watched him in dead silence, watching him walk behind the trees. The same ones that connected to our campsite, but that also went in between us and him. I anticipated each time I'd see him walk forward out from behind a tree. It was a good 4 or 5 he came out from. It wasn't until after this that I noticed he had stopped walking, or he was behind the tree standing still. I was still totally freaked out, thinking, where did he go? I watched my boyfriend looking at what happened, thinking the same thing. but he had shrugged it off, and I naively did as well. We actually ended up forgetting about it and went to the quarry late at night. It was beautiful seeing the stars reflecting against the water, but the deep, now all black water was terrifying to say the least. We walked back to our campsite, lied in our tent, and smoked a joint. I soon began to feel an uneasy feeling, which I was trying to ignore, telling myself it was because I was so high. After some silence between us, my boyfriend says to me, "Do you feel like we're being watched?" I said, "Why would you say that?" half joking but full serious that I was scared. My boyfriend wanted to get out from the tent, so we were standing by a car, and I got this stupid idea that being in the middle of the field that's in the middle of the campground is the safest place for us. My logic being if someone was going to come up at us, we'd at least be able to see them coming. So we're in the middle of this field when we see a similar looking shadow figure from earlier staring at us. He must have been about 20 yards away. We both notice him while walking, and he's walking in the same direction as us. We change directions, and so does he. We tell one another if we change again and he does that too, that we're booking it to my car. When we change, he follows, and we book it to the car. I watched him from my seat as he slowly walked back into the darkness while staring in our direction. My boyfriend at this point says to me, "Let's get out of here." I agree, but all of our camping gear is outside. We quietly get our things together, not trying to freak the other one out. The weirdest part of this story, in my opinion, is the next part. My headlights weren't working, and there was a weird fog over my windshield that didn't go away, no matter what I did. We had to drive out of the woods with only low beams and a strange fog over the window. We could barely see, but we got out of there. Weirdly enough, the fog went away as soon as we hit the gas station. We got home around 1 at night. I told my father the story the next day, and he said he's glad we got out of there, or else we could have been murdered. 2 people have died at this campground while snorkeling, which I find out after I got home. My boyfriend and I think it was either a person trying to kill us or a Wendigo. We've kind of settled on the Wendigo, because what happened was so unexplainable to us. Thanks for reading. Many years ago, as a teenager, I struggled with severe depression. I refused to take medication and tried all kinds of alternative therapies and approaches to alleviate the horrific disillusionment I relentlessly felt, but I'm sure you can guess that nothing worked. My mother was always trying to get me to take medication, but I refused, so it was surprising to me that she recommended the rapid eye movement therapy, or I think it is now called EDMR, that I believe stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. The whole idea of EDMR is based on the direction our eyes look when we recall things. So by directing where the eyes go, the client can directly access traumatic memories and then process them. Most practitioners now use their hand or a laser pointer and ask you to follow movements, all back and forth. My practitioner used a wand kind of like the wand of a choral or music director would use. She also had me rapidly open and close my eyes, as I followed with my eyes and attention the direction of her wand, up and down, side to side, and so forth. All the while she was talking to me, directing me to relax, to remember, to let go. I did as she instructed. I rapidly blinked my eyes and followed her direction. The things started to happen. I spontaneously started to laugh. I apologized but continued to laugh seemingly against my will. Then I quietly teared up. There were no memories, just strong emotions. So strong I couldn't hide them. As she kept pushing forward, her voice grew more distant, and I tried to stay present, but I told her I needed to sleep, that I desperately needed her to stop. I have never had a more powerful need to close my eyes and sleep than I did at that point. She nevertheless preserved and insisted I not close my eyes, and that I keep blinking and following the movement of her wand. It started to get dreadfully painful to continue, despite her continued command that I participate. It became harder and harder to blink my stiff and tired eyes, and not fall backwards into oblivious exhaustion. She could see me falling asleep and ramped up her commands more aggressively, more insistent. I stay present and on task. The whole tenet behind the movement in the eyes is to access traumatic memories for the purpose of processing them. I could not continue with this process, no matter my desire to participate. I could feel my body shutting down, and then things went blank. Everything went dark, and I'm still not sure for how long. My next memory was my EDMR therapist crying and almost screaming, "In the name of Jesus Christ, be gone!" on repeat. As I began to wake and become more aware of my surroundings, I could see how disheveled and disoriented my therapist was. I asked her if she was okay, but she clearly wasn't. I asked her what happened. She said I kept saying, "I can't do this. I need to sleep." She kept pushing me to continue and finish the session. At some point after her continued attempts to keep me present, I simultaneously arched my back so the top of my head was on the table while I let out a deafening wail or scream. She insisted that I broke her wand in half, but I wasn't conscious enough to investigate whether or not it was her sudden increased grip of her wand from a startle response that broke it, or if it was indeed broken in the way that would suggest something other than herself had snapped it. I do have a faint memory of arching my back, but no memory of screaming, let alone a deafening scream. She clearly thought I was possessed. I have little knowledge of that subject, so I have little to say about it. It does concern me, however. It concerns me for different reasons, though. I think the mind is very powerful and the subconscious extremely powerful. I'm worried that my mind found a way to stop the session, because there's trauma my mind does not want me to be conscious of. I ruined that poor lady, though. I hope that if this work is her passion, that she is able to demystify the experience so she's not worried about clients being possessed. Or maybe she can just come to terms with having to deal with the sprites and homunculi that lurk around all of us. I was groggy and slow to come back to consciousness. I had a bunch of questions, but I was told to leave and never return. I wish I had more information about what actually transpired. I must confess I don't believe I was possessed. However, I do wonder what's lurking around my subconscious that's so awful my subconscious would pull an Emily Rose on my therapist. Shortly after this grasp at alternative treatment of my overwhelming depression, I took medication, and within days felt immensely better. It's all alchemy. It's all still a dark science. I can only hope the side effects will not be too grave in the end. So, to preface this, I would like to state that this story is probably going to read like the plot of a campy 1980s horror movie, and is going to be very long. However, this entire story is true. If not from being 5 miles from cell reception and the way the story ends, there would be a police report for verification. I will be changing names, locations, and some details in order to protect the privacy of the innocent. A buddy of mine and I try to camp twice a month now that I have a vehicle that can be trusted to get to some of the more remote areas of our state. We planned a camping trip for the past weekend, 2/18/21 through 2/20/21. We chose a fairly remote location we had been to the previous weekend. The previous weekend, we were the only people we'd seen within 1 mile of our camp spot. Friday night, we got there and set up. This story takes place Saturday night. It's about 9 p.m., so the sun is long gone, and the moon hasn't quite risen up yet. It's pitch black out other than our fire that lights up the night sky. Suddenly, we hear a man screaming. We listen intently, silently sharing an anxious look. At first, we're hoping it was someone drunk and having a little too much fun, but it quickly becomes obvious this isn't fun party screaming. It isn't even like he's hurt. It sounds full of despair, anger, and anguish. I'm going to take a moment to remind you that this is at 9 p.m., pitch black night in the middle of nowhere, 5 miles from the nearest cell phone tower. We hadn't seen anyone in hours. The screaming continues for what feels like hours, but was probably about 5 solid minutes. We had no idea what to make of it, and started feeling extremely paranoid. We gathered up anything remotely close to a weapon and tried to come up with explanations of the screaming while keeping our eyes on the forest around us. After about 15 tense minutes of fear-induced paranoia, I nearly fell out of my seat as I watched a flashlight and lantern slowly enter our camp. I greeted the stranger with a basic, "How's it going?" before he was even lit up by the fire. He responded quickly, but flatly by asking if we could do him a favor. "That depends on the favor," my buddy and I said in unison, obviously tense, holding our weapons close to us. The stranger proceeded to ask if he could hang out for a second by the fire. Given the 2 of us and 1 of him, plus our myriad of weapons gathered from around camp, we decided to agree and let him hang out. After a short second of awkward silence, I ask him what the hell is going on. He proceeds to tell me and my buddy that he was camping down the trail with his buddy and that his buddy had snapped and tried to kill him. "Wait, what?" I said before the thought even finished processing in my head. "Is that the screaming we heard earlier?" The man slowly nods, staring blankly into the fire, and begins his story. "We were just hanging out, man. We came up earlier today, and my buddy just freaked out. He started screaming, and just wouldn't stop. Then, he attacked me. He lunged at me, and I told him just to back off and chill, you know? Well, he kept coming after me, and it started getting pretty violent, and I'm pretty sure he was going to kill me, so I grabbed my car keys, the lights, and ran. I don't know what to do, man. He chased me when I ran, and I don't know what to do. We don't have firearms or anything, but we do have a hatchet." My buddy and I look at each other for a second, completely astonished. Then something horrible dawned on me. "Wait, he chased you? Like he's on his way here, right now?" The man just slowly nods in reply, and right on cue, like some terrible horror movie come to life, we hear screaming from maybe 30 to 40 feet from our camp, down on the main trail. "I just want your fucking balance, Gary. I want your balance, Gary. Gary, where are you? Where are you, Gary?" I'd never in my life heard a man scream like this. I've never heard anything like it in my life. It was brutal, guttural scream that was shrill to the ears yet deep in pitch. The sound of someone gone completely mad, and the way he said the stranger's name would switch erratically from long and sing-songy to short, guttural punches of sound. We killed our lights, became silent, and listened. By some miracle, the madman didn't notice our camp, continued walking down the trail screaming the whole way. We ended up chatting with who we will call Gary for hours, listening to the screaming getting further and further away. Come to find out, they had taken 4.5 to 5 grams of magic mushrooms each, and his buddy, who we will call Ty, was a coworker of his and was fine for 3.5 hours, then suddenly snapped. It seemed as though Ty thought he would kill Gary and steal his good trip. We hear the screams get further and further for over 2 hours. By this time, it's 11 p.m. The moon is starting to come out, and it's below 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Ty had no jacket or flashlight, according to Gary. My buddy and I are way too drunk to drive out of camp to get cell service, as it was snowy and icy, and required 2 to 3 miles of highway driving after getting off the trail, and Gary was still lightly feeling the effects of the weed and shrooms. We had to make the decision to let the guy wander, hope he sobered up and could find his own way back, and he did. Oh, he did, right into our camp. We hear yelling after about an hour of no screams, maybe 30 feet from the camp again. "Hey, help, please help me, I'm lost." And we can tell the man's walking from the woods into our camp. We tell Gary to hide just in case, and greet the man with me carrying my 12-gauge shotgun and my 40 caliber pistol holstered, my buddy carrying his AK-47 style rifle and his 2 9mm Glocks holstered, and with our flashlights on our brightest settings right in his face. He was about 6'2" to 6'3" and approximately 300 pounds. We talked to him, decided he was calm enough to walk with, and walked him back to his camp. He seemed really remorseful, said he blacked out and didn't remember anything, and had a falling out with his buddy. We escorted him back to his camp down the trail, returned and told Gary that Ty seemed cool, and if anything else happened to scream and come running, we would come out and help you. It ended up being a happy ending. We made friends with Gary, and I got his phone number to make sure the next day he got back into town safely, back to his wife and kid, and we're actually planning a camping trip with him very soon. But Ty, who wandered screaming like a deranged maniac in the forest, potentially wielding a hatchet to murder your friend to steal his good trip, or whatever it is your psychosis-filled mind was thinking, for the love of God, let's not meet again. For context, my mom at the time was working 40 to 50 hours a week, so while on vacation from school, I was responsible for watching my younger sister. I was a high school junior at this time and had babysitting experience, so I decided why not. I didn't get paid to watch my little sister, but she was a relatively good kid, so it wouldn't be a hassle. Before my mom went to work, she gave me the normal rules, told me to make sure I keep an eye on my little sister. I shrugged her off and sat on the couch to watch some TV. My little sister raced down the stairs 15 minutes later and asked me if she could go next door to collect some old dolls our neighbors promised her. It was a sweet old lady who was about 65 and had grandkids me and my sister's age. I told her yes and to be back in 5 minutes, to which she put on her sandals to retrieve the dolls. At this time, my little sister had a habit of leaving the door open. I didn't mind most of the time because it was hot and we lived in a safe public neighborhood. There was slim to no crime in our neighborhood and everyone knew everyone else. That being said, if you do something bad, your parents will know about it within 1 hour. I know you're reading this and thinking how dumb it is to leave the door open, but like I said, we lived in a public place. While my sister was next door, I decided to use the restroom. We have 2 bathrooms, 1 half bathroom downstairs for guests, and 1 full bathroom upstairs. While I was in the bathroom downstairs, I could hear my sister slamming the door closed and walking up the stairs to her room. I finished up, flushed, and washed my hands, then sat back on the couch to watch TV. Curious to what my sister got, I called her name. No answer, just a muffled rustling of toys. I decided to leave her alone and turn my attention back to the TV. I was so into the show I was watching, I didn't notice my little sister standing across from me. It didn't click for me that I hadn't heard her come downstairs. I just stared at her, annoyed that she kept staring back at me. I paused the TV and asked her what she wanted. She looked at me wide-eyed and told me someone was upstairs. I laughed at her and told her that wasn't funny. She was visibly scared. I thought she was joking. I asked her if she came back home a few minutes ago and she said no. She said the door was closed and pointed to the disregarded box of dolls by the back door. I walked into the kitchen, called my dad to come over, grabbed a big knife from the kitchen drawer. I walked back into the living room and told my sister to go into the bathroom and lock the door behind her. I told her not to open it until I told her, "Mom's home," so she would know it's me. I crept up the stairs and peeked into each room until I got to my little sister's door. It was cracked open and toys and clothes now littered her normally organized room. I didn't wait. I kicked open the door and flicked on the light. My blood ran cold. In my little sister's rocking chair sat a little old woman rocking back and forth with a plastic baby doll in hand. I stepped further into the room and demanded she get out of my house at once. I wasn't raised to curse at adults, but this was a strange woman in my sister's room. She stopped rocking and started to hum to the tune of a baby lullaby. The most terrifying part wasn't that she was pretending that the baby was real. It was the unnatural smile stretched across her wrinkled face. She stood up and giggled on the way out and down the stairs. I stood there staring at her room, trying to see if anything was missing. I didn't even notice that she took the doll with her. I walked back downstairs and checked the room before letting my little sister know she could come out. By then my dad was pulling up in the driveway, and I told him what had just happened. He walked around and checked the rooms like I had. While he was upstairs, my little sister told me that the lady knew where she had been and tried to get her to come with her. The creepiest part was my sister told me she sounded like she was attempting to sound like me, but when she didn't say, "Mom's home," she stepped away from the door. I don't know who that was that walked into my house to steal my little sister's doll or my little sister, but let's never meet. So this happened to me and my little brother. We'll name him Dylan for confidentiality purposes, when we lived together a few years back. I was a 25-year-old male and my little brother was 19. We were just relaxing playing some Halo 3 on the Xbox, smoking a bowl, just being bros. It was a Saturday night in the midsummer of 2009. We lived in a quiet neighborhood. Neighbors were just far enough apart you had privacy, and they never got into your business. But we all knew each other, as our parents lived in the houses for years, and they were our childhood homes. When my parents retired, they moved off and left the house to us, so we never had to worry about a roof over our head. Now, our house is at the end of a cul-de-sac with a garage door to the right, and our front door is up 4 steps to the left of the window, between our garage door, but from our kitchen you can see straight out when the curtains are open. The particular night, however, would grow to haunt me and my brother to this day. After a few hardcore hours of gaming, it was 3 a.m. My brother would need to get up to stretch his legs and relax his hands. He went downstairs to grab some water and a snack, when suddenly Dylan comes running up the stairs and locks the door, freaking the hell out. I look at him, confused as shit, barking, "Bro, what's wrong? What's wrong?" With a pale, ghost-white face, he looks at me and says, "There's a guy on the porch with his hands cuffed to the window, smiling from ear to ear." Then we hear 5 knocks at the door. We froze in our tracks, backing slowly away from the door. I got under my bed and grabbed the machete and bat I keep. I give the bat to Dylan as he's taller than me and has longer arms to be more beneficial to him. We tiptoe back to the bedroom door and unlock it. We crack the door open just enough to see out. Then suddenly the man knocks over and over. Before you know it, he had knocked at least 30 times, and then it just stopped. I told Dylan to grab my cell phone and call 911. He did, and dispatch sent officers our way immediately. While on the phone, the man went around the back of our house because we heard screaming coming from the backyard. The man was there, just looking at the bedroom window with that creepy-ass smile. We just stayed out of the line of sight, peeking from the corners. Suddenly, the man takes off in full sprint and threw himself into our back door. We yell, "Oh shit, he's trying to break in our back door," to the dispatch officer. She tells units to step it up as he's trying to make entry. We hear the sirens closing in faster and faster as the man continues to bash himself into our door. On the third bash, we hear the door crash open. We stay as quiet as possible, listening to things in the kitchen being smashed to hell, and the man yelling, come out, wherever you are." I whisper to dispatch that he's downstairs in the kitchen. She tells officers he's made entry, and one unit said he was close. We ready our bat and machete as we hear footsteps creaking up the stairs. Then blue lights can be seen illuminating the house as we hear police come out with "your hands up, make your presence known." The man books it down the stairs and gets tackled by an officer and handcuffed after a bit of a struggle. We came out when the officers cleared the house and made sure it was safe. The man was high on meth, just looking to rob us to get another fix. We're so thankful the officer arrived when he did. We thanked him until the time he left. The officer still came by from time to check in on us, and even played video games with us a few times. I still get nightmares of that creepy-ass smile. And to whomever you are, creepy smiley man, I hope we never meet again. Thank you guys for watching and listening until the end of this video. Please make sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe for future content. Email your stories to the email in the description box below. Until we meet again, stay safe, stay healthy, stay sinful.